Hi, good morning, everyone. Or I should say, good afternoon, everyone. It's afternoon now. Welcome to our webinar today on rivers and watercourses, the importance of riparian zones. My name is Denise Savageau, and I serve as the chair of the State Water Plan Outreach and Education Subgroup under the Implementation Workgroup. This meeting is being recorded and is also being streamed live today by Connecticut and the Connecticut Network. We're asking everyone to please keep your video off and make sure that you are on mute. Thank you. At this time, I invite Jack Bukowski, Chair of the Water Planning Council, to give us some opening remarks. Jack?
Thank you very much, Denise. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really thrilled to be here. I believe this is the third seminar that I've opened on behalf of the Water Planning Council, and I'd like to applaud Denise for her efforts with coordinating these very, very worthwhile events. On behalf of my colleagues on the council, Martin Heft from the Office of Policy Management, Lori Matthew from the Public Health Department, and Graham Stevens from the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, we welcome you. We have a very important topic that we're covering this afternoon in terms of source protection. And I always like to talk about, and some of you heard this before, but I never get tired of talking about it. As you know, I come from the heart of the Nautick Valley, the Nautick River. And the Beacon Falls goes right along the Nautick River. And growing up, when I went to school in Waterbury and drove down Route 8, I never knew what color. Of course, I'm telling my age here too. But coming down Route 8, I never knew what color that river was going to be. It could be black one day, blue another day, pink another day, and was always because of the Nautick chemical, which, thank God, is no longer in existence and has been completely torn down at this point. But the river is so safe now, and people fish in it and boat in it and kayak in it. And they actually have a duck race in it. And they just had one this past week, which is a fundraiser. And so people can really take part in that. And so what we're talking about and have talked about in the Water Planning Council is the protection of our water supply. And we have a very passionate group of people, some are on the panel this afternoon, that really are working very, very hard. I was thinking about it before I gave my remarks. I've been doing this on the council for well over 20 years, and many people have been us, like Margaret Miner, with us since day one. And I think we've made a lot of progress, but we have a ways to go, and we're getting there. And the big cornerstone of that, which this is part of, within the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Inland Wetland Commission, was the development implementation of the state water plan. So we're very, very happy that it's moving along the way it is. We always need to look moving forward. We need to get some funding, which we're working very, very hard on at this point in time. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Denise, but I want to just leave you, everybody thinks that, everybody knows that Benjamin Franklin invented electricity, but he also has a very good quote, which I think is very appropriate. He said, "When the well's dry, we know the worth of water." So nothing is more important than what Benjamin Franklin said many, many, many years ago. And it's interesting that he was the person that invented electricity, but also knew the value of water. So with that, I'm going to turn it back. I wish the panel success this afternoon, and back to you, Denise. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jack. We're always so pleased to have you join us, and your support of this work has been incredible. So thank you, and looking forward to working as we move forward.
Thank you.
Okay, so as Jack alluded to, June is Rivers Month, and what better way to celebrate than to continue our celebration that we started on the 50th anniversary of the Connecticut Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act. This act was passed in 1972 and is as important today as it was then, and maybe more. When most people think about the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act, they just say wetlands, the Wetlands Act. They focus on the wetlands, but it is just as important that remember that the act also is the Wetlands and Watercourses Act, and that's what we're focusing on today. There have been many successes and challenges with the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act in protecting rivers and the lands around them, the areas that we call the riparian zones. And I think that it's a timely thing for us to talk about today. And that is why it is our focus today. We have a great panel for you that I'm going to introduce. And I'm going to go through all of their, I'll introduce all the panelists and tell you who they are. And then each panelist is going to take about 8 minutes or so to go over some of their thoughts on riparian zones and what they've been working on. And then we're going to have a moderated panel discussion. We're going to ask you to please put questions in the chat. And we're also going to ask that you limit what you put in the chat. We don't need side dialogues going on back and forth in the chat, unless you do it privately. That's one thing. But we want to make sure that we're looking for questions. Comments are fine as well, but we just don't want to have the dialogue when people are speaking, so that the chat keeps coming up and keeps coming up. So we want you to be a little bit of restraint on the chat in terms of until we really get into the moderated panel and the discussions. Then the chat can go wild. But we ask you to limit it during the presentations. Thank you. So today, again, we have a great group of panelists, and we're going to be focusing on the riparian areas, and not only about the celebration of the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act, but it's also the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. And as Jack said, we have a state water plan. And how does the work that we're doing to protect our inland wetlands and watercourses and the riparian zones we're going to talk to, how does that impact the state water plan? So that's our goal today, is to have some of those discussions. We have 3 great panelists. Charles Vittich, he's the Senior Project Manager with the Western Council of Governments. He has over 40 years of experience working in the fields of environment, health and safety at the federal level, state and local levels of government. His recently published study entitled "The Case for Riparian Corridor Protection: Zoning Strategies to Reduce Pollution of Inland Waters and Resultant Hypoxia of Long Island Sound" identifies the key role wetlands and streambelts play in reducing non-point source discharges of nitrogen and phosphorus. He is an appointed member of the Connecticut Council of Environmental Quality. So I'd like to welcome Charles. Charles, if you could unmute and put on your video, that would be great. And we'll start the screen sharing.
Okay, thanks, Denise. Okay, still waiting for that. Well, thanks for joining what I consider to be one of the most important environmental issues of the last 50 years, the importance of riparian zones. During this period, there's been an explosion in scientific evidence for the protection of riparian zones. We should note in 1972, as Denise said, Connecticut was actually one of the earliest states to enact protections for inland wetlands and watercourses. It turns out New England states were all the leaders in that period of time, but of the 17 states that really have in the wetland regulations of any consequence in permitting programs, Connecticut is one of the earliest to do so. And of course, to underscore, the focus here in this presentation is on the watercourses issues. But what people may not know is that in the same year that wetland regulations laws were adopted in Connecticut, it was also when the concept of streambelt zoning emerged in the state of Connecticut. Very few paid attention to it, but it's because science basically moves faster than legislation. And that's over the last 30 years, we've seen an explosion in the understandings of the ecological significance of riparian corridor zones. So this increased attention that we're seeing to it now actually has led to what's called Public Act 2129, which had sleeper provisions, as I call them, which require all zoning commissions to address the pollutants, specifically the hypoxic conditions in Long Island Sound. I might mention that I spent my career tracking environmental regulations in the state of Connecticut for the last 40 years. I have a database of zoning, subdivision, floodplain, plans of development. All of these have been monitored and tracked for the last 40 years to see what municipalities in the state are doing. And this is what led to the report called The Case for Riparian Quarter Protections, which I urge anyone interested in protecting our watercourses to read. You can go to the next slide. So let's just talk about why protect riparian quarters in Connecticut. There's a wide range of ecosystem services and benefits that the riparian quarters provide, as you can see from this list, from reducing the severity of flooding, improving water quality, protecting migratory pathways, both terrestrial and aquatic, reducing thermal pollution of rivers. These are all very important, and they contribute to the value of looking at an ecosystem rather than segments of the ecosystem, not the segment of floodplains, not the segment of wetlands, but looking at it as a whole, as a gestalt. Things that have not really been addressed historically are such things as creating migratory pathways, which what our river systems provide. But even recent things that have come up, because the science continues to evolve, are such things as microclimate benefits of having riparian quarters, where they are self-inducing processes that create evapotranspiration and then in turn return the water to those areas where those forested canopies exist within the riparian quarters. So there's a huge sets of values that are provided. But let's look at this picture just for a moment on the left, which is the hypoxic conditions in Long Island Sound. The dark red are the areas where we have the least amount of dissolved oxygen over the period of 27 years from 1994 to 2021. And namely, that is caused by nitrogen and phosphorus discharges from the rivers in the state of Connecticut. And we have to dare say, for all of our upstream neighbors in New Hampshire, Vermont, and Massachusetts. So this is more than just an individual effort by municipalities. It's more than an individual effort by the state of Connecticut. This requires the work of all of New England to deal with these kind of issues. And you can go to the next slide. So this slide looks at the phosphorus yields in the state of Connecticut. The dark blue colors are those that have the least amount of phosphorus within their watershed. And the greenish colors, particularly the dark green, represent where we have very high concentrations of phosphorus yields within our water system, which of course are being discharged into the water system from the watersheds from which they are draining. And what you'll see here is basically, if you look closely, the I-91 and I-95 corridors, and on the eastern part of the state, the I-395 corridors, are the ones that have the greatest amount of phosphorus discharges. And of course, there's a close relationship between those interstate systems and historical growth in densities in the state of Connecticut. But of course, these sources of discharge are multifold. It's not just stormwater runoff, it's crops and pasture land, it's septic system leaching fields, it's urban runoff, it's even stream bank erosion, which happens to be one of the issues that riparian quarter protections are so valuable for. And of course, a major source of it is the wastewater treatment plants that contribute in many of our rivers to the phosphorus and nitrogen that we have found in Long Island Sound. You can go to the next slide. Now, this particular table is probably one of the most iconic and most important. There we go. It's one of the most important single tables that represents the value of buffer zones for reducing sediment, nitrogen, and phosphorus. If you look on the table on the left where the width is in feet, if you go from 15 feet of a grass plant cover down to 93 feet of grass and forest, you increase the sediment reduction from 61% to about 97%. And likewise for nitrogen from 4% to about 80%. So there's a direct correlation between the width of a riparian buffer and the ability of that buffer to reduce the discharges of phosphorus and nitrogen and sediments into our water systems. This is one of the most important studies. There are many studies that have been done. In fact, I'd like to say that for those who don't know anything about it, if you look at my picture for the moment rather than a slide, the book Riparian is probably the classic book for those interested in learning about the value of riparian corridors. And I would dare say that it is really the Bible, since it has consolidated the knowledge of some 5,000 studies that have been done over the last 30 years. So I highly encourage people to look at that if you're interested in pursuing the values of riparian corridors. But riparian corridors really require a lot of thought, because it's not just simply a distance factor. There are many other variables that affect the value of a riparian corridor or riparian zone. And things that affect it would be the slope of the land, the soil types, the depth of groundwater. All of these have a bearing on how big the riparian corridor zone should be. However, based on the practices in New England as a whole, it's important for administrative reasons to have a simple buffer zone, a 200-foot buffer zone or a 100-foot zone, depending upon the sensitivity or importance of that particular buffer in that particular river system, whether it's providing drinking water or it's not, whether it has high phosphorus or it does not. You can go to the next slide. So what rivers should have riparian corridor protections? Well, the easy answer is all of them should, under Public Act 2129. However, since we all like to have the nuances of life, the nuances are, of course, that some rivers require greater protection. And if we look at what our sister states in New England are doing, we'll find that greater priority has been given to rivers feeding public water supplies. That's one of the standards that's used in other states like Rhode Island and Massachusetts. Or wild and scenic rivers merit and deserve much greater protections. And of course, Class AA or A rivers, which are basically drinking water rivers or rivers that are potential for drinking water. And of course, headwater stream areas, which are one of the most overlooked areas of protection within our river corridor system. So that basically summarizes in a brief nutshell the issues that we're dealing with here. But you will see on the right, the protection strategies vary according to how much protection is needed. But certainly, if we take the Chesapeake Bay experience, 150 feet is what is recommended in the Chesapeake Bay as a protection strategy. However, in Massachusetts, they use 200 feet. And in Rhode Island, they use 200 feet for very sensitive zones. So one of the next steps that we really have to look at here in Connecticut is going from just looking at wetlands only, looking at floodplains only, looking at land use only, looking now at a much broader ecosystem approach. And also, we need to begin to collaborate between the inland wetland agencies that have the knowledge and the zoning commissions now that have been given a mandate. And this is an opportune time now for a collaboration in the areas of river corridor protections like we've never had before. So I think that's enough, Denise, to get the ball rolling here.
Thank you, Charles. Okay, we're going to go on with our next speaker. If I could ask Alicia to show up here. Hi, Alicia. Alicia is the Executive Director of Rivers Alliance of Connecticut. Prior to that, she was the river steward for the Connecticut River Conservancy. As a fly angler, paddler, and rower, water is central to her play, as it is her work. She found an outlet for her passion for rivers through Trout Unlimited, serving in various roles at the chapter and state level. She also serves as a volunteer in several capacities as Secretary of the Fisheries Advisory Council, a member of the Connecticut Council of Environmental Quality, on the advisory board of the Connecticut Institute for Water Resources. She is also the co-chair of the Water Planning Council Advisory Group. Alicia holds a BS in Biological Sciences from the University of Connecticut, and she resides in Newington with her husband, Bob, and children, Sean and Dana, and her beloved dog, Lizzie. And we're so glad she's here today because her son just graduated from high school. So she's in the middle of celebrating high school with family and whatever. So thanks for being here, Alicia. And I'll call up your slides.
Sure, and I'll get started while you're calling my slides up. Thank you all for joining us on during your lunchtime here. I'm going to take things back up to the 10,000-foot level and talk about how riparian buffers are managed more generally, and some of the opportunities we have for improvement, and by to help us. And by us, I mean state agencies, stakeholders, citizens that have come together to create plans and recommendations, create more consistent protections for riparian buffers. So the first thing I want to do is encourage you all to think like watershed managers. So the slide you see here has all of our major basins in Connecticut. As you can see, they all drain to Long Island Sound. What falls on the ground ends up in the sounds. So what you do in your backyard, or what we do in our backyards, and the land use decisions that are made in your town, whether you live in Westbrook or Wellington or Stonington or way up in Salisbury, ultimately has an impact on Long Island Sound, not just the specific water body or stream segment that's being impacted by that decision or that action. Next slide. So nothing illustrates this better than this photo. So this was taken via satellite following Hurricane Irene. What you're seeing is silt that's come down from the Connecticut River and is then being deposited in Long Island Sound. This silt's not from Connecticut. It's from Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts, where the heaviest rains fell. So this visually really kind of illustrates what we're talking about here, the importance of what we do in a specific area has an impact in other places, and the reason why we really need to look at really strengthening our riparian buffer protections, particularly with climate change, because we're going to see this more going forward. So I want you to just think about this at a smaller scale for just a second. And instead of silt, the plume is what I like to call the no-see-ums, right? When we talk about pollution, you have the see-ums. Jack had mentioned the Naugatuck River changing color. Well, we don't see bacteria, we don't see phosphorus, we don't see nitrogen. But essentially, what you see here is what's happening when rain falls in our communities, in our yards, in our towns, and moving into downstream water bodies and eventually Long Island Sound. And another good real-time example of what we're all experiencing right now is harmful algal blooms in our rivers and our lakes. That is a result of increased nutrients from what's called non-point source pollution. Next slide, please. So what's the solution? So as Charles had emphasized, a cheap and effective way to manage these or to stop these nutrients is by protecting and reestablishing riparian or streamside buffers. And this is a picture, just a cartoon illustration of essentially what a buffer is. So if you have a vegetated buffer on the left-hand side, You have a forested buffer on the right-hand side. And so if you can, think about, a slide in your, just a backyard slide, playground slide. Now, if you run water down that slide and into maybe a little kiddie pool, that water is going to go completely unimpeded into that kiddie pool, right? Because it's on a slide. So if you create a condition either by mowing all the way down to a water body or paving up to a water body, you're creating that same sort of situation where you're creating the slide for water to go down. That water can have a lot of different things in it that are going unimpeded into your water body. Well, just think about putting something at the end of the slide that's going to catch all that water and maybe, get the plastic pieces. And again, we're using the CMs that we can think of as an example, are going to get filtered out, and that water is just going to trickle much cleaner down into your little kiddie pool. So that's what riparian buffers do. They are a nature-based solution. They are one of the cheapest ways to ensure that we have better water quality, improved water quality, we don't have degradation in water quality, have protection from erosion, from flooding, and all of the other things that Charles had mentioned. Next slide, please. And this really kind of brings this home. So Charles showed you a slide of the different, the benefit of the riparian buffer. This shows you the economics of it. So the second line from above is riparian buffer improvement to protect the Bantam Lake from harmful algal blooms. It is the cheapest way to remove phosphorus, the cheapest. So one of the things that Rivers Alliance is working on right now with a small group of folks is coming up with various strategies. It's going to be a multi-pronged strategy on how to strengthen our buffer protections to help us and our communities and our rivers and streams and drinking water be more resilient to climate change, and having better consistent buffer protections, because right now those decisions are made at a municipal land use level 169 different ways. And I will wrap up here. I will let Sean go next, and then I will touch on that a little bit more during the question and answer period.
Thank you, Alicia. Well, let me stop sharing here, and I'm going to talk about Sean. Sean, hi. Thank you for joining us today. So Sean serves as the executive director of the Lake Watermark Task Force for the past 5 years, and has over 30 years of experience in environmental consultation, environmental conservation with an in-depth knowledge of ecology and natural history of Northwestern Connecticut. Prior to joining the task force, Sean spent 18 years as executive director and soil scientist at the Northwest Conservation District. During his tenure at the district, Sean worked side by side with 34 towns and residents of Northwest Connecticut to conserve natural resources by using sustainable development strategies. He is a certified soil scientist, Army Corps of Engineers wetland delineator, professional in soil erosion and sediment control, and a knowledgeable champion of low impact development. He has worked with multiple wetland zoning and conservation commissions to revise municipal regulations, draft watershed management plans, and to improve sediment and erosion control and stormwater quality management plans. Prior to working at the Northwest Conservation District, Sean spent 3 years as an agroforester with the Peace Corps in Kenya. Just out of college, Sean spent 6 years with an environmental consulting firm, helping to design the cleanup of Superfund sites all over the US. He graduated with a degree from UConn in Natural Resource Management and Engineering. Sean, we're so pleased to have you here, and let me call up your slides.
Thank you, Denise. This is a great opportunity, and I wanted to share just a quick success story that I had working at the task force. And resident geese are a real big problem on Lake Warmog. There's a lot of friendly habitat for them. And when I first got to the task force, I was approached by the Parks and Rec department because their town beach was absolutely overrun every night by the resident geese population. And the lifeguards, had to spend every morning, at least an hour every morning, raking up goose droppings, not only on the beach, but also on the picnic area. And if you show the next slide, you could see what the park looked like when I got to the task force in 2017. And so that's the picnic area. And just past the lifeguard station is about a 10 or 15-foot beach that goes down to the lake. And it's just prime habitat for those resident geese. And so the Parks and Rec department approached me and to talk about how to resolve this matter, because it's not only a water quality problem, it's a human health issue. Have kids in bare feet running around this park all the time. So they had a few extra dollars in the Parks and Rec budget. And I said, I will give you a list of plants, native plants, and you give me 5 or 6 volunteers with shovels and get me a truckload of compost, and we will solve this problem forever. And so sure enough, they ordered up the plants, and the next slide shows what the buffer looks like, or when we first installed it. And the day that this buffer was installed, the following day, there was absolutely no goose droppings on the beach or in the picnic area behind these shrubs. And that has been the case 100% for the last 3 years. So in this case, this riparian buffer, or this planted native buffer, completely resolved the goose dropping problem. But the fun doesn't stop there. The story continues, because these buffers aren't only, like you've heard from the past speakers, it's not only goose dropping resolution to the problem, but it's also a water quality issue. And I have actually followed the data. The Torrington Area Health Department actually samples this beach every week. The water, they wade into the water and collect E. coli samples for the health of the swimmers. And I looked at the past 10 years of data, and then I looked at the past 3 years of data that were collected since the buffer was installed. And the E. coli levels dropped precipitously the year after, and the following years after this riparian buffer was installed. But it's not only a water quality and a deterrent for the resident geese population, but it's also an aesthetic. I mean, if you go to the next slide, this thing ain't bad looking. It actually added a very nice aesthetic component to the overall layout of the beach and picnic area. And excuse me, and also added a lot to the ecological diversity of the area. Now you have a whole bunch of plants that are pollinator friendly. So, with a simple installation of a riparian buffer, you get 4 wins. You get aesthetics, you get ecological diversity, you get making it difficult for native geese, and you also get a nice something to look at. So I thought I wanted to share this story because it just shows you the power and the effects of a riparian buffer can have in a whole bunch of different ways. So, the last thing I wanted to mention, and you can go to the next slide because you can see what it looks like today. Oh, this is in 2021, and then the following slide is what it looks like today. Oh, but hang on, Denise, go back to that slide. I just have something quick to show you if you go backwards. If you notice on the previous slide, there's a parking lot way over to the left, and all the water used to stream off that parking lot, come across the lawn, and then erode the beach into the lake. And now you can see we created a slight diversion where you can see the water actually puddling up behind this feature to sink into the ground before it goes into the lake. And here again, you have the nutrients in stormwater runoff growing pollinator plants and native plants rather than growing cyanobacteria in the lake. So I just wanted to show that picture. And then the next slide is actually what it looks like today. It's kept low. It only has to be at the eye level with the geese to work. They take a look. If they can't see over it, that's it. They're done. They go back into the water or go somewhere else. And I want to repeat this example around Lake Warmock some more because it is so effective. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is, as a soil scientist and someone who's spent his career delineating wetlands, both using the Connecticut method and the Army Corps method. And I want to, it's an interesting fun fact about the Wetland Act. And that is, we here in Connecticut define wetland soil types differently than all the rest of the other 49 states. Everybody else uses the Army Corps of Engineer method, which is the national method. However, because Connecticut was the first to create the Inland Wetland Act, they decided to use the USDA definition of wetland soils, which is a drainage class, based on drainage class. So we here in Connecticut define soils differently than everybody else. And from my experience in doing both those types of delineations, even on the same site, the Connecticut method is way more conservative than the Army Corps method. And when I say conservative, I mean the Connecticut method catches a lot more wetland area than the Army Corps method does. And I would say that happened in 95% of the projects where I did both delineations. So just a fun and interesting fact about our Inland Wetland Watercourse Act here in Connecticut. So that was my story. Thanks, everyone. Oh, yeah, quick. Do I have one more minute?
1 more minute, Sean.
1 more minute, okay. I just want to make everybody aware of this resource. It was created by First Light, who manages all the hydroelectric power resources up and down the Housatonic. And they created this homeowner guide to vegetated buffer zones. And in it has some great simple designs of how to do great riparian buffers. And my favorite, if you go to the next slide, is chapter 3, which has a great appendix of all the different types of native plants, their heights, what kind, do they like wet feet? Do they like dry feet? How much sun do they like? And you can go through this whenever I use this all the time when I'm designing buffers, because it's such a great way to select the right plants that are going to thrive in that riparian habitat. So that was it.
All right, thanks, Sean. If I could ask all the panelists to put their videos back on now so we can see everybody, and we're going to get into some questions, and we're also going to see, look at what if we have anything in the chat. So if anybody has any questions, you can put those in the chat. But we're going to start, and I'm going to start with Charles. Charles, you just did this great publication that you kind of alluded to in your talk, The Case for Riparian Corridor Protections. And in there, you make the case for using zoning and planning and zoning to protect riparian areas, because there are some limitations in the Wetlands and Watercourse statute. You do, however, make recommendations to strengthen the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act. Can you expand on the changes that you think would be better, should be made to the Inland Wetland and Watercourses Act that you would believe would be helpful for riparian areas?
Well, for one, I think like the rest of the other New England states, we should have riparian corridor setback standards. And we should specifically, because currently Connecticut only has policy on riparian corridor setbacks, no regulations, no law. And so we need legislative change, but in doing so, what we need to do is focus on the most sensitive resource areas. Public drinking water supplies need setbacks in terms of review. Even taking the upland review concept, we need 200-foot setbacks for those. Now, having looked at all the inland wetland regulations in the state, and you'll find it in that Case for Riparian Corridor Protection study, only a handful of our towns in Connecticut have established 200-foot upland review areas. And that needs to be looked at a system level, at the legislative level, so that we're looking at that not all resources are equal in their value. So we need some protections that go towards defining greater protections for more valuable resources, particularly public drinking water supplies. That would be number one. And whether we copy Massachusetts or we copy Rhode Island or any of the New England states, they've all gone much, much further on riparian corridor protections. This is, in my opinion, probably the next frontier which Connecticut legislators need to address because it's not just the zoning commissions. They don't have the expertise of the inland wetland agencies. The inland wetland agencies would be actually the ones that would be the best informed and the best positioned to work on these issues. But I think another point that I'd make is that we need more collaboration between the inland wetland agencies and the zoning commissions on riparian corridor protections. And I'll give you the example of Mansfield, Connecticut. Their plan of conservation and development includes riparian corridor protections that were developed jointly, in this case, by the Conservation Commission. And they happen to have, unfortunately, a zoning commission that also has an inland wetland function. But at least they've taken that concept of working together rather than looking at it as a zoning responsibility or an inland wetland. They looked at how can we collaborate. So I think there's a number of legislative things, and I think there's a number of things that can be done without legislation to improve riparian corridors.
All right, thanks. I'm going to go back to Alicia now. So in addition to serving as the Executive Director for Rivers Alliance, you're also co-chair of the Water Planning Council Advisory Group. How important do you see the success of riparian zone protection to Rivers Alliance as a statewide advocacy group for rivers? And also, how does it fit into the state water plan?
Sure. So it is incredibly important because this issue is honestly what we spend the majority of our time on when it comes to inquiries from the public and other organizations on activities in their town by their local waterway that, how they're asking how is this going to impact my waterway and what can I do about it? And as Joanna Shapiro had commented in the comments, we have this upland review area, but the upland review area does not truly protect a water body or a wetland. We have set some goals within the state water plan and within the Governor's Council on Climate Change and made some recommendations that will help us better manage, better mitigate, have more resilient to climate change. We're already seeing more frequent rainstorms. We're seeing an increase in harmful algal blooms. We're seeing so many things as a result of climate change. And as we have shown from Sean's projects that he worked on, from the analysis that was done for the Bantam Lake Watershed-Based Plan, these simple nature-based solutions of riparian buffers are what we need. And while we have these goals, we're making land use decisions 169 different ways in Connecticut. And so having that consistency is going to be extremely important, because when I asked you all to think as a watershed manager, if we don't consistently value the importance of this very cheap solution to some of the problems we're seeing, then we are not going to get anywhere in meeting some of these green infrastructure, land use goals, water quality goals that Connecticut has in general. So it's very important, Denise.
Thanks, Alicia. I'm gonna ask Sean a question, then I'm gonna scroll through the chat and see if I have any questions in there. Sean, you have worked, as we had indicated before, with so many towns and numerous agencies in the field, implementing best management practices and restoration projects in riparian areas. What advice can you provide to volunteers on land use agencies and in watershed groups about getting a project done? How do we get these done? And what technical assistance and funding is out there?
All right. Wow, what a question. I think in getting my experience in getting projects done, well, first of all, I'm going to speak biasly as a soil scientist. Whenever I looked at projects, can help towns with projects and work with land use change proposals, the number one thing to always remember when it comes to water quality with those projects, whatever they may be, is if you can get the water into the ground before it gets into a water body, you've just completed your job. You're done. If you can soak everything in or most everything in, you're done. Soils are spectacular at cleaning up now. Now, I think your question was resources for doing projects like that. And I think I can't specifically answer that question because I'm thinking back to all the projects that I've done through the years. And depending on the project is where I leaned on for resources. You know, if it was a non-point source project, I'd lean on the DEP for funds. If it was something more educational or outreach and education, I might lean on foundations, my local foundations. So there's also, it would depend on the project where I would lean on folks to get funding for it. So I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, so I think that, I mean, there are, so, you know, obviously the 319, there's so much dollars out there now for infrastructure. And we're now looking at riparian areas as being green infrastructure. Are these the solutions that we're looking at? So I think we need to be creative when we're looking at the different types of funding that's coming down from Long Island Sound Futures Fund. You know, there's a whole lot of different dollars coming down.
Yeah, and don't forget about the Farm Bill. Oh boy, talk about a fat amount of money coming to Connecticut.
That's right. A lot of times people don't think about the Farm Bill as something, and it's not just about this. So I'm going to put out a general question to some of you. There's a recent study that just came out that is looking at the need to educate people about the link between forests and water quality. Which is amazing to me. It's like we don't think about that. So I guess from your perspective and maybe from your organization, what types of educational outreach do you think we need to do to make sure that the public understands? Because as Charles indicated, if we're going to change legislation, we need to make sure that the public is behind this. But there seems to be this disconnect with this new study that people don't understand that forests equals clean water, and not only clean water, but abundant water. So just, I'd like to see if we could have some thoughts. And maybe we'll start with you, Sean. Go in the reverse.
Yeah, no, the first thing that popped into the head when you asked that question was just look at how a water company manages their land. It's really expensive to clean up, and filter water for drinking water purposes. But if you look at how, especially the water companies here that operate in the Northwest corner, they manage their forests in a specific way because it's a lot cheaper to take care of do vegetation management because it gets a lot more expensive once that dirty water gets to the plant and it needs to be filtered. So you could start with just by educating folks how the tips and tricks that our water companies are using to keep water clean.
Alicia, you have any comments to add to this?
Of course I do. First of all, I would like to make a distinction between education and outreach to help the public understand why we need to have some change in regulations or laws or policy and between using education and outreach as the solution. We're not going to get all the way there with just saying we're going to educate the public on the importance of riparian buffers. But that education is extremely important in helping the public understand the need for more consistent protections for riparian zones.
All right, Charles, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Of course I do. I've only been working on this for many, many years. I used to work on the Chesapeake Bay watershed management plan in my previous incarnation, working in the federal government. And I consider education really the first thing that we've got to begin working on, not only in the grade school level, in the college level, the high school level. We need to inculcate our environmental education program with the riparian corridor concept. We've done a lot of work in educating people about pollution, but we haven't done a lot of education about how to protect our river systems through riparian corridors. We really need to focus on a generational change, not just a quick outreach effort. That's not enough. It's going to have to be a generational change where we educate the younger kids. They're the ones who are going to inherit this earth. They need to know why it's important. Our grandchildren need to understand the value of this. We need to start emphasizing, just as Alicia and Sean said, these values that this riparian corridors has. It's easy to start with legislation and then figure out how to educate later, but it's much easier to get consensus and support if we've already developed a threshold level of understanding. And I think one of the things we could do is if each planning and zoning commission and each inland wetland agency actually established jointly a municipal plan of conservation and development, like I mentioned earlier, that has the basic needs for this. At least that gets out to the municipalities, and each citizen who cares about their municipality will have the opportunity to see why that is important. So there's a number of things that are needed. Some are the quick starts, but some are really generational. But it's fundamental that we get an education about the importance of riparian corridors.
All right, thanks. And so I'm just looking at the chat. I did post the link that folks are interested in the study I had. It was out of the Great Lakes area, and it was posted. I found it posted by Carl Hunkinen. Carl is with USDA Forest Service, and he's the watershed manager in the Northeast here, and he's been working with us on source water protection. And he's a great resource, and he provided this study for folks to take a look at. So that is now in the link. Then there's another question, and I think this is particularly for Charles. Charles, they were looking to see what was the document in which the Mansfield Conservation Commission put zoning recommendations?
That would be the Mansfield Plan of Conservation and Development, which was completed about 4 or 5 years ago, and you can find it on the Mansfield town website. I recommend it for those who are interested in municipalities that have actually taken the long view of how, in this case, the Conservation Commission and the Zoning Commission can work together to protect riparian corridors. It's a good example, and I understand Eric Thomas is a proponent of this, and I commend Eric for making that concept, although it's preceded by the work in Mansfield.
Okay, so one of the questions that I think we're going to that has been asked is what education opportunities, speakers, materials are available for presentation to local wetland conservation commissions. And there's a host of materials out there. I don't know if anybody wants to speak directly to that. But I know actually, that, yeah, go ahead, Alicia, sorry. Then take it.
Carol, I'm so glad you asked that question because this highlights one of the things that I wanted to talk about. So the DEP has an online training for inland wetlands commissioners. It is online. They can do it at their own pace. But this kind of highlights an opportunity that we have, right? Because under the Inland Wetlands Act, only one member of a commission has to go through DEP's training. So the information's there, but they don't have to do it. And but on the other side, on the planning and zoning side, under in Public Act 2129, which passed last year, every member of the Planning and Zoning Commission has to go through at least 4 hours of training. So our inland wetland commissioners are not held to the same standard as our planning and zoning commissioners. Second, I just want to say that Rivers Alliance does have a buffer brochure that if you send an email to rivers@riversalliance.org, we can send out to you. You can share it with your commissioners. And that this was created in 2005. And this is just kind of highlights how nature-based solutions haven't changed over the years. It's not a new idea. We just haven't been utilizing it. All that information in our buffer brochures from 2005 is still absolutely current, and the information is useful. So we're happy to share that with folks who need it.
Okay, I know there's some more comments and whatever in the chat, but we're running out of time, and we've really been trying to hold these workshops to a lunch and learn. There's a host of folks who can do education and outreach materials. If you contact any of the folks here with their organizations, they can help you, but also your local soil and water conservation district is doing a lot of work. The state water plan implementation work group, education outreach, we are providing a host of workshops. So there's lots of opportunities if you're looking for speakers, and certainly you can contact any of us. And I will put my email in the chat before we leave the meeting. But I just wanted to wrap up and say we're going to be doing some additional workshops in the fall. This is our last workshop for this time this year. Oops, let me see if I can go back. There we go. So we want to thank everybody for attending the couple of workshops we've had. We know that some folks have been watching this series. We're going to take a break for the summer, but we'll be back. We're doing a storyboard on the history of the Inland Wetland Act and how its relationship to the state water plan, and that's going to be released in September. We also know that some of our other partners celebrating the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act, the CACIWC, which is the Connecticut Association of Inland Wetland Commissioners, is going to be focusing their workshop on the 50th anniversary of the act, and we'll be looking at some of these topics. So more and more folks will be seeing. So we're again just sorry that this keeps happening. I don't know what's going on with my presentation. So it just seems to not being holding in place for some reason. So my apologies. Anyway, we're going to stop the share there and just say thank you to everybody. We'll be joining again next fall. We've already got some topics that we're talking about. Source water protection is certainly going to be one of them, and that's public drinking water supply watersheds in particular. But we'll be looking again at following up with all of the work that's being done as we continue to celebrate the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act and the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. So thank you again to our panelists. It was great having you on, and so much resource information. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day now.
Thanks, Denise.